Welcome, curious dreamer, to Science of Sleep. Tonight we open the doorway to silence itself. Not simply quiet, but the absolute absence of sound. A place where external noise disappears, and your brain awakens to its own hidden music. We'll travel deep into this strange, delicate world, where your breath becomes your rhythm, your heartbeat becomes your guide, and your mind gently unfolds into unseen patterns. If this voyage calms your thoughts, subscribe and ring the bell now, and join me again beneath the infinite stillness of the cosmos. We often believe we understand silence. We imagine quiet reading rooms, peaceful forests, or the still air of late-night solitude. But these are only versions of quiet, faint, partial, never complete. The world continues to hum, even in its calmest moments. Distant engines rumble softly. Electrical wires vibrate. Air currents brush against windows. Buildings creak and shift as they settle. Our ears may not always notice, but our brain is always listening, always processing. This continuous soundscape has been part of our species' world for millions of years. In nature, background noise signaled life-flowing rivers, rustling leaves, animal calls, or the distant crash of waves. Our brains evolved to navigate these environments, tuning out constant harmless noise while staying alert for meaningful signals. A predator's movement, a child's cry, the subtle snap of a branch. Even today, with modern technology, our minds float in this ever-present sea of background sound, machines humming, traffic rolling, devices buzzing. Silence, true silence, almost never occurs naturally. But in laboratories around the world, scientists have dared to remove this soundscape entirely. They've built special spaces known as anechoic chambers, environments, so perfectly insulated that sound cannot reflect, vibrate, or even breathe. Their walls are lined with deep foam wedges that swallow vibrations before they can bounce. The floors are suspended, disconnected from any building foundation, preventing even distant tremors from sneaking inside. Doors sealed tightly, thick and heavy, blocking outside air and sound. Inside these chambers, sound levels fall below human perception. We measure these levels in decibels, where 0 represents the faintest sound the human ear can typically hear. But these rooms often drop below -20 decibels a level, so still that the very concept of silence takes on an entirely new meaning. For many who enter, the experience is profoundly disorienting. At first, there is confusion, a sense that something is missing. The footsteps you expect to hear make no sound. The tiny echoes your brain anticipates never arrive. You shift your body slightly, but no creaks or whispers follow. The world becomes oddly flat. In this space, the only sounds left are those generated by your own body, and even they seem unusually loud. Your breathing, once automatic and unnoticed, now fills your awareness. You hear each inhalation traveling through your nose, down your throat, and into your lungs. Your heartbeat rises into your ears as a steady, rhythmic drum. Some even describe hearing the quiet whoosh of blood pulsing through arteries, or the faint creaks as muscles shift and tendons adjust. The tiny symphony inside your body, long masked by the world's ambient noise, rises into sharp focus. But this is only the beginning. The silence does not simply allow you to hear your body. It also changes how your brain operates. Normally, your mind is flooded with a constant flow of information. Sounds, sights, smells, movement, touch. Each of these inputs helps anchor you in space and time, guiding your attention, your balance, your thoughts. When these inputs fade, the brain must adapt. One of the first changes occurs in the brain's default mode network, a system that activates when you're resting, daydreaming, or not focused on external tasks. This network allows your mind to wander, to drift into memories, to reflect, to imagine. As external stimulation falls away, this network grows stronger, pulling your attention inward. In this state, your thoughts often feel more vivid, your emotions more noticeable. For some, this creates a calming, almost meditative experience. The brain's rhythm slows, like floating weightless in warm water. For others, the sudden shift inward brings discomfort. With no distractions to occupy attention, anxious thoughts may rise to the surface. Lingering worries, unresolved emotions, or buried memories float into view, no longer hidden beneath the noise of daily life. Stranger still, many people begin to hear phantom sounds that don't exist outside their own heads. High-pitched tones, ringing, or faint humming may appear symptoms of spontaneous otoacoustic emissions, where the brain, craving sensory input, begins to amplify its own background electrical noise. This isn't hearing in the traditional sense. It's the mind listening to itself. Researchers studying brain activity in these environments have documented these shifts in real time. Electroencephalogram measurements reveal a gradual rise in alpha waves associated with quiet wakefulness and peaceful rest. As time passes, theta waves begin to appear, those slower, deeper brain waves that accompany light sleep, deep meditation, and creative daydreaming. In some individuals, extended silence even triggers brief hallucinatory imagery, soft lights, swirling colors, or shadowy scenes that drift gently behind closed eyelids. The brain, denied external input, begins to generate its own experience. It's not unlike the process of falling asleep each night. As you prepare for bed, your senses gradually withdraw. Your hearing quiets. Your vision dims. Your body relaxes. Your brain shifts from the outside world to the inner world of dreams. In this way, silence mimics part of that descent into sleep, but without the comforting rituals that usually guide the process. Inside anechoic chambers, this shift can feel sudden and unfamiliar. For many participants, extended time in absolute silence becomes uncomfortable, even overwhelming. Some report a growing sensation of floating or spinning, while others describe feeling trapped inside their own minds. The brain's balance system, the vestibular system, relies partly on subtle auditory cues to maintain spatial awareness. Without those cues, disorientation creeps in. The brain, starved for input, begins to generate its own sense of motion, even when the body remains perfectly still. Very few people can tolerate more than 30 minutes inside these chambers. Even trained scientists conducting studies report unease as time passes. The silence presses inward, like a soft weight growing heavier with each breath. This is why many researchers describe extreme silence not as absence, but as a new kind of stimulus. Rather than shutting down, the brain becomes highly active, generating spontaneous, internal signals to fill the void. The quieter the environment, the louder the mind becomes. And yet, despite this intensity, silence holds an undeniable fascination. It is not emptiness, it is presence. It reveals how profoundly our minds depend on the world around us and how strange, beautiful, and sometimes unsettling it can be when that world goes dark. As we continue forward on this journey, we'll explore even deeper realms of sensory deprivation, where not just sound, but light, touch, and gravity itself are removed. We'll enter the weightless stillness of sensory deprivation tanks. We'll venture into the endless silence of outer space, and we'll examine how both modern science and ancient traditions have long recognized that true silence is not absence, it is transformation. But before we drift into these other dimensions, we must first understand that silence does not allow the brain to rest. Instead, it unlocks new pathways, inviting us to meet ourselves in ways few ever experience. Because silence is not empty. Silence is alive. The journey into silence deepens and the senses surrender one by one while the familiar world fades into the background, leaving the mind suspended in a realm where neither distance nor direction feels entirely real, and every breath becomes a marker in an endless ocean of quiet. Sensory deprivation tanks lead the way into this territory by removing not just sound but touch, temperature, light, and gravity's daily insistence on weight. Each pod is filled with a dense solution of magnesium salts heated to match skin temperature, so precisely that within minutes the line between body and water dissolves, and even the faint shimmer of your own pulse, blending with the heavy stillness, feels like a distant memory of movement rather than motion itself. The very first float tanks were built in the mid-20th century by researchers who wanted to know what consciousness would become without the relentless push of sensory input. They expected the mind to switch off, yet what they discovered was the opposite. Because when the doors closed and the lights vanished, neural activity did not fade, it shifted. External processors down-regulated, while interior networks glowed brighter and more intricate than ever. revealing patterns, usually hidden behind the noise of daylight living. Modern imaging confirms what those early pioneers sensed. Intuitively functional magnetic resonance scans show visual and auditory cortices growing quiet like city streets at dawn, while hubs tied to self-awareness, storytelling, memory synthesis, and emotional calibration illuminate in branching constellations of activity. Floating for the first time, you may notice an immediate release along the spine as vertebrae decompress without pressure points. Beneath hips or shoulders, muscles soften. In layers, the fluid simultaneously supports and liberates, and as minute adjustments no longer consume energy, the brain receives a cascade of signals. It seldom hears gentle stretch receptors and ligaments, the subtle sliding of fascia, the rhythmic expansion of lungs free from gravitational resistance. Heart beats slow, though each contraction seems louder, echoing within chest walls, amplified by conductive salt water. Some people feel invisible hands brushing along calves or drifting feathers across cheeks, phantom sensations born from a nervous system searching for familiar borders against an unfamiliar void. Time unspools strangely here, without the ticking metronome of external change. 10 minutes can feel like a dream stretched across an hour, and an hour can collapse into what seems like a single inhalation. When researchers place unobtrusive EEG electrodes along the scalp, they see a mosaic of alpha waves bloom first, signaling serene alertness, then waves lengthen into languid theta that bridge waking and dreaming realms. Within those slower currents, vivid internal cinemas ignite. One floater describes watching swirling auroras of turquoise and violet drifting behind closed eyelids, while another recounts reliving a childhood summer afternoon with sensory sharpness that felt more honest than recollection, and yet somehow gentler than a lucid dream. The tank becomes an echo chamber for thought and emotion. Unresolved worries sometimes rise swiftly, like hidden fish, startled from shaded depths, yet the gentle uniform buoyancy seems to cradle even difficult memories, allowing them to surface without the sting they often carry in daylight conversation. Therapists harness this effect in anxiety and PTSD treatment plans, encouraging clients to process memories in the softness of near-total isolation. After several sessions, heart rate variability frequently increases, a sign that the vagus nerve, the body's primary brake pedal, has strengthened its calming influence over stress reflex loops. Blood pressure drops, muscle tension eases, magnesium absorbed through skin bolsters neurotransmitter regulation, quietly fueling serotonin synthesis while bathing joints in ionic warmth. Silence of this magnitude bends perception of the body itself. The vestibular system, embedded deep within the inner ear, usually tracks shifts in gravity and acceleration. But in the tank, those cues grow faint and ambiguous. Small head movements create slow swells that fool the brain into believing the entire room tilts, or that you drift through a great invisible current. Some people feel as though they are rolling in gentle orbit, others that they are suspended at the center of an endless sphere. Astronauts later report that these early float experiences mirrored their first nights on the International Space Station, where every push sends the body sailing for meters, and the absence of airborne sound turns cabins into hushed cathedrals, broken only by the soft mechanical breath of life support fans. On station windows, the cosmos looks silent. But astronauts say the silence has flavor, a velvet density that feels older than time. Inside that hush, fluids shift from legs toward head, puffy faces, crowd sinuses, eyes throb softly behind lids, and many record dreams more vivid than any on Earth, perhaps because microgravity and ambient silence remove the last threads tethering perception to terrestrial reference points. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield wrote that his brain seemed to echo inside itself like a choir rehearsing in an abandoned cathedral, each thought ringing longer than expected, each memory carrying extra harmonics of color and emotion. He found solace by tucking earbuds under his sleep mask, piping in faint recordings of wind and distant thunderstorms, restoring a sliver of Earth's chaotic lullaby. Back on the ground, researchers challenge volunteers to spend extended periods in dark underground caves where stone walls mute echoes and clocks mean little. Over weeks, those explorers report circadian rhythms stretching beyond 24 hours, the brain choosing its own day length when signals of sunrise and social schedule fade. Melatonin pours into blood, earlier cortisol lingers later, and dream Diaries overflow with narratives that defy linear structure, as if the storyteller, within the default mode network, no longer bows to the cadence of external events. Yet silence is not merely a canvas for dreams. It can physically heal. Pain patients immersed in routine float therapy often describe sensations of warmth, washing through joints as buoyancy eases inflammation while the brain's pain matrix cools in the gentle flood of endorphins. Fibromyalgia sufferers show measurable decreases in tender point sensitivity after a month of weekly sessions. Athletes exploit the magnesium-rich solution to accelerate muscle repair, allowing micro-tears in fibers to mend under the nurturing cloak of stillness. When the tank lid eventually opens, light splashes across the eyes, and the faintest ambient scent, drip a footstep, a distant door rush, in like bright water after a long drought. The body feels momentarily heavier, gravity more assertive, but many emerge with an afterglow, a lingering echo of expanded internal space. Surveys reveal improved sleep that night, and often for several nights, following, as if the nervous system remembers the taste of stillness and seeks to recreate it during deep slumber. Yet our exploration of profound quiet would be incomplete without venturing beyond saltwater wombs, into the ultimate silence, where no air vibrates at all. The vacuum of space carries no sound. For astronauts who leave station exteriors on spacewalks, the void grips their suits like an endless velvet mask, muting every tool tap and tether click, such that only transmitted radio voices and the rhythmic hiss of suit ventilation keep company with a beating heart amplified by helmet walls. During those hours, cognition stretches perception, sometimes wandering into daydreams, while eyes fix on Earth turning silently below, and stars burning in crisp clarity on all sides. Some report an almost spiritual hush that lingers long after they dock and re-enter pressurized modules. These experiences teach us that the absence of sensory input is not neutral. It carves new paths through neural circuits, inviting creativity, provoking insight, and occasionally stirring unease. It reminds us that consciousness is not a passive observer, but an active generator, forever weaving stories from whatever raw material it receives. Remove the ordinary, and the extraordinary emerges. Float tanks and orbital cabins alike prove that silence is alive, a landscape worth exploring with respect and curiosity. As our journey continues, we will peel back yet another layer and ask how minds adapt when audio silence meets visual infinity in the expansive black above our atmosphere, and what that means for the delicate thresholds between waking thought and sleeping dream. From the stillness of water we drift upward, toward the silent sea of stars, where sound cannot travel, and gravity relaxes its steady hand, until it becomes a faint memory, instead of a constant companion. Orbit begins with the thunder of rocket engines, yet that roar falls away the moment the capsule settles into freefall and the interior cabin hushes to a low mechanical breath. Inside this soft metallic shell, astronauts discover a new type of silence, not born of padding and insulation, but of physics itself, because without air, vibration finds no medium crossing from surface to surface. Only faint knocks conduct through metal and reach the inner ear as gentle taps. This hush is older than any chamber on Earth. It is the natural state of the universe between galaxies and inside that vast quiet. The brain starts to rewrite its own expectations of sound, motion, and rest. Early in a mission, the first noticeable change is fluid redistribution. Every drop of blood and lymph, once drawn downward by Earth's pull, begins migrating upward, filling faces with a puffy moon-like fullness that presses against sinus passages and swells tissues around the eyes. The added pressure distorts the usual resonance of the head, so that voices echo internally. Words spoken aloud reverberate through bone, rather than air, turning conversation into something slightly hollow and detached. At night, when the station's lights dim, astronauts strap themselves into sleeping bags fixed to the wall, and the cabin fans slow to conserve energy. The resulting stillness feels unnerving. Some crew members report phantom vibrations, as if expecting the hum of distant traffic or wind through tree branches, the mind searching for a familiar anchor in an acoustic void. Brain imaging conducted before and after long-duration missions shows structural shifts in networks dedicated to spatial orientation and balance. On Earth, these networks rely on a dance of inputs from eyes, muscles, joints, and especially the vestibular apparatus tucked deep inside the skull. In microgravity, the otolith crystals inside this apparatus no longer settle downward, they drift near, weightless, leaving the brain uncertain which way is up. In response, visual cortices expand their influence, while auditory maps shrink slightly because directional hearing becomes less useful when walls and ceilings no longer define vertical. The absence of airborne sound washes away subtle cues that once helped locate footsteps or the drip of a faucet. Instead, astronauts learn to navigate by sight, touch, and the faint buzz of equipment transmitted through their suits or socks. Sleep within this acoustic vacuum follows its own arc. Actigraphy worn by crew members shows that while total sleep time can match Earth norms, sleep structure shifts. The first weeks often bring shorter stretches of rapid eye movement, and longer twilight periods of light sleep, perhaps because the brain hesitates to fully disengage in an environment so novel. Heart rate variability data reveals heightened, sympathetic tone during the initial adaptation phase, suggesting the body remains on gentle alert. Over successive orbits, however, the parasympathetic system reasserts control. Aided by strict light schedules that mimic Earth's day, the station cycles through 16 sunrises and sunsets every 24 hours. Yet programmable LEDs bathe living quarters in bright blue-enriched light during work periods, then fade to warm amber before rest. This rhythmic lighting substitutes for missing auditory cues, giving the body a reliable metronome, while silence reigns unbroken in private log entries. Many astronauts describe dreams more vivid than any they recall from Earth. Some float outside the station gazing at shimmering auroras dancing over the planet below. Others drift through childhood scenes, so richly detailed they can smell cut grass or taste summer fruit. Neuroscientists propose that in the quiet of orbit, reduced external stimulation frees representational memory networks to fire with greater intensity, filling dream time with crisp, multisensory imagery. Without the gentle interruptions of car horns rain against rooftops, or a distant clock ticking, the brain's nightly simulations expand unchallenged. When crew members wake, they write entire pages before breakfast to capture the lingering clarity of these dreams, hoping to study how silence and weightlessness reshape the architecture of imagination. Yet silence in space is not always peaceful. During extravehicular activities, astronauts step beyond the air-filled habitat into the true vacuum. Once outside, radio chatter in their helmets provides the only auditory link to life. Every other sensation moves inward to bone-conducted vibrations, from the suit's pumps or the steady hiss of circulated oxygen. Veteran spacewalkers train to recognize mechanical anomalies by subtle changes in these internal sounds. A shift in pump frequency could signal a blockage. A faint click might hint at an ice crystal forming in a feed line. Their ability to detect such nuances shows how exquisitely the brain can tune itself when background noise dissolves. Psychologists examining mission transcripts notice that after a successful spacewalk, crew dialogue slows the following night. Words stretch into longer pauses, as if the brain still floats in that boundaryless stillness. Some astronauts keep small speakers near their sleep stations playing soft recordings of rainfall or ocean surf, not because they miss Earth's weather, but because a thin skein of familiar noise eases the transition between alertness and repose, acting as a bridge from the stark hush of vacuum to the gentle quiet that lulled them to childhood sleep. Ground experiments replicate aspects of orbital silence in deep underground bunkers carved from granite, where thick rock dampens sound too. Near nothing and the absence of daylight erases circadian cues. Volunteers living weeks in these caves begin inventing rituals to mark time, tapping spoons against mugs or humming simple tunes so the brain can gauge intervals. Without such markers, they report drifting thoughts, expanded dream recall, and a peculiar blending of memory and fantasy during waking rest periods. Electroencephalograms reveal extended runs of theta activity even while eyes remain open, suggesting the boundary between wake and dream thins when auditory reality falls away. These findings ripple back to clinical settings. Therapists working with trauma survivors create controlled silence pods that dampen sound, yet allow faint guided imagery tracks. Patients slip into semi-weightless chairs, eyes covered, ears surrounded by adaptive acoustic panels, and listen 2 slow-spoken narratives designed to walk memory corridors without sudden sensory shocks. Preliminary trials show reduced startle responses and improved sleep quality, hinting that measured doses of silence can teach hypervigilant brains to trust stillness again. As we draw the curtains on cosmic quiet, we circle back to Earth, carrying lessons carved by vacuum and darkness. Silence teaches that the mind is not a passive recipient, but an eager architect. Strip away airborne sound, and it constructs new rooms from heartbeat and breath. Remove gravity, and it reorders spatial maps. Hide sunrise, and it paints its own dawn across the inner eyelid. To sleep well, we need not absolute silence, but a harmony between the noise we cannot avoid and the quiet we can invite. A rhythm that mirrors the gentle curve of orbit where day and night arrive on schedule, and the station hum becomes a lullaby, soft, predictable, just loud enough to remind the brain it is safe. In our next descent, we will couple these insights with the older wisdom of monastic cells and desert caves where seekers sought silence long before rockets flew, uniting modern neuroimaging with ancient practice to reveal how timeless rituals can guide the restless mind into restful night, and the same hush that hovers above the station's solar arrays echoes across histories carved in stone. For long before vacuum chambers and orbital cabins, humanity was already experimenting with a silence deep enough to reshape the brain. Deep in the Nile desert, 4th century hermits scraped shallow caves into sun-baked limestone, lined the floors with woven reeds, then sealed the entrances with slabs that muffled every breeze. Once inside, they reported hearing the pulse behind their eardrums, louder than any bird call they had left behind. And when they wrote about their nights on fragments of papyrus, the letters wander like soft waves. Each sentence, a record of an inner voice, amplified by the total absence of an outer one. Modern acoustic surveys of these cells show background levels hovering near 15 decibels, only a heartbeat above an anechoic chamber. Yet the physiological notes the monks left behind read like contemporary lab logs: slower breath, cooler skin, dream recall swelling with color and scent. 600 years later, Benedictine builders in the Italian hills designed dormitories with walls to palms thick. Oak doors weighted with iron to hush hinge squeaks, corridor arches calculated so that even footfalls lost their echo before reaching the cloister. From sundown to dawn, the grand silence rule barred every spoken word. And still today, novices describe the strange moment in the small hours when candlewicks hiss and gutter snipes quiet, leaving nothing but the inner rustle of blood and bone. Portable IG headbands worn by visiting neuroscientists find alpha rhythm dominating these hours, yet interspersed with brief surges of theta. The same pattern float tank volunteers display at peak relaxations, suggesting that curated hush nudges waking brains toward a threshold normally crossed only in early sleep. Across the Himalayas, cave yogis spend winter retreats sealed behind stacked stone doors, a slit left for barley broth and melted snow. Over weeks, diaries scratched onto birch bark reveal how minute bodily sounds inflate until a finger twitch seems thunderous. Some write of a steady ringing that grows into layered harmonics. Others of visions blooming unbidden, entire mountain ranges unfolding behind closed eyelids, when researchers placed dry sensor IG caps beneath their woolen hoods. Gamma activity, often linked to integrative insight, remained elevated for hours, while cortisol in morning saliva measured half the baseline of neighboring villagers, implying that profound quiet is not merely restful, but metabolically calming. Silence was not always sought for contemplation. Sometimes it served precision. In medieval scriptoria, copyists faced fines for whispered chatter, lest a misheard word corrupt sacred text. After months in near-mute halls, some scribes noted phantom flutes or distant choirs, early anecdotes of auditory hallucination now echoed by anechoic chamber volunteers after 30 minutes. Today, fMRI confirms that when environmental sound sinks below 20 decibels, the auditory cortex begins amplifying internal noise. And if the vigil lengthens, the brain's speech expectation circuits may fabricate faint voices to fill the gap, proof that our neuromachinery would rather simulate sound than endure a vacuum. Architects, unaware of decibel charts, nonetheless mastered acoustic attenuation by layering straw, clay, and air-filled niches. They damped mid-frequency speech by almost 4 decibels per finger with figures. Modern simulation software replicates within a margin of error, so a monk pacing stone corridors heard only robe, fibers brushing sandstone, that handcrafted dampening mirrors the foam wedges of contemporary chambers, and the magnesium water that cocoons floaters, illustrating an intuitive convergence of design across eras. Reduce reflection, soften vibration, invite the nervous system to idle. Physiology follows architecture. Cardiologists studying Carmelite nuns found nighttime heart rate variability 15% higher than age-matched controls, mirroring ICU trials where enforced quiet time drops postoperative delirium risk. In neonatal wards, when alarms shift from shrill beeps to silent dashboards and staff speak in low tones, premature infants gain weight faster, echoing 12th century monastic notes claiming newborns thrived when wet nurses sang only at dawn. A thread stretches from sandstone cells to silicon-sealed pods. Silence stabilizes autonomic rhythms. Whether the heartbeat belongs to a desert ascetic or a kilogram-sized preemie, not all silence heals. Context decides. When silence is confinement, submarine duty, late-night shift in windowless control rooms, the amygdala sometimes flashes warnings, raising heart rate, fragmenting sleep. Studies on miners, isolated in deep shafts, show microarousals peppering polysomnography. Traces the brain scanning darkness for threats it cannot hear, yet introduce ritual bell, marking hours. A candle signaling safety and quiet transforms from uncertainty to sanctuary. Confirming what Zen abbot Shenru Suzuki hinted, silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of trust. Trust grows when silence is measured, so modern clinics borrow from antiquity. Pain management centers host silence lounges lined with fabric baffles. Patients recline in zero-gravity chairs, while low-frequency transducers pulse beneath upholstery, offering just enough vibration to ground proprioception without breaking. Quiet. Over 8-week programs, migraine frequency drops by 1/3, echoing Himalayan reports of headache auras dissolving during cave retreats. Psychotherapists guide veterans through whisper-level re-exposure sessions in anechoic booths. Trauma flashbacks decreasing as the nervous system relearns that hush need not predict threat. Across disciplines, a principle repeats. When extraneous noise falls away, the mind hears itself, and what it hears can scare or soothe, depending on preparation. Ancient rulebooks therefore paired silence with breath counts, beads sliding through fingers, sunrise bells. The vessel empty, yet a gentle rudder remains. Astronauts replicate this by playing rainforest loops at bedtime 5 decibels above. Station ventilation to anchor cortex to Earth-like randomness, preventing the vacuum from blooming into pressure. Thus silence becomes an instrument, tuned by walls or water or star-studded void, shaping hormones, dreams, immune cascades. It humbles high-tech designs by revealing that clay monastic bricks and state-of-the-art acoustic foam share a goal. Quiet enough for inner symphonies to surface, but not so absolute that the conductor panics. The sweet spot lies between breath and heartbeat, between owl, hoot, and vacuum, where alpha drifts into theta and the mind glides toward sleep without ever noticing the moment it crossed the border. From these age-old corridors, our exploration flows seamlessly into the bright lights of modern hospitals and research labs, where controlled hush is prescribed like medicine and monitored by electrodes, showing that the wisdom etched into desert sandstone still guides the restless circuits of contemporary life toward the gentle coda of restorative slumber. In modern wards where fluorescent lights hum and monitors flash green traces across glass screens, clinicians have begun prescribing doses of measured hush the same way they schedule antibiotics or adjust ventilator pressures, and the protocol often starts with something as simple as dimming corridor bulbs, then asking nurses to walk on soft tread sandals so that rubber soles replace the sharp click of heels against vinyl. Each midnight, a gentle chime signals the beginning of hospital quiet time, and overhead paging falls silent, while staff switch from spoken updates to handheld tablet messages, freeing recovering hearts from the tiny jolts that even a distant intercom bark can bring. Continuous telemetry during these hours shows arrhythmia clusters thinning out in postoperative patients and respiratory rates drifting into slower waves, more closely matching deep sleep patterns seen in healthy volunteers. in intensive care. Unit's new designs position equipment behind acoustic glass en route. Alarm tones through smart headsets so the room itself never barks at the unconscious body lying beneath pale blankets. Surgeons examining cortisol curves notice that just one night under these conditions can prune morning stress hormone peaks by nearly 1/3, compared to the classic beeping landscape of legacy ICS. The result is smoother blood pressure charts, fewer bursts of delirium, and a shorter median stay. Hospitals that retrofit with ceiling baffles report staff fatigue scores improving as well. A reminder that quiet heals both sides of the bedrail. Neonatal wings amplify these gains because every decibel rings louder inside an infant who left the womb weeks early. Engineers hide pump motors behind sandwich panels of viscoelastic foam, and nurses lower lids on incubator ports with padded hinges so that airflow becomes a whisper. And the only rhythm is the faint murmur of an oxygen blender. Weight charts show that preterm infants gain grams more predictably, and incidents of apnea decrease when acoustic peaks never rise. Beyond 50 dB, the level of a soft conversation, developmental therapists believe the benefit is twofold because silence spares fragile ears, while also nudging immature circadian clocks to synchronize around the mother's heartbeat recordings piped in at subspeech volumes. That thumped cadence replaces random clangs, offering a structured signal akin to monastery bells, guiding adult novices through night vigils, and creating an auditory metronome the limbic system can trust. For chronic pain clinics, quiet enters through flotation pods lined in dark composite shells curved like spacecraft heat shields. Patients close the hatch and slip into skin temperature brine, and the room beyond fades until the only sensation is the slow swell of breathing. Functional MRI, before and after a 10-session course, shows that insular cortex activation drops while the dorsolateral prefrontal network brightens, an indication that raw pain signals yield to top-down modulation. People with fibromyalgia walk out describing joints that feel as if heated stones were placed beneath ligaments, yet no massage ever touched them, only silence thick as velvet. Rheumatologists capture reductions in interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein markers, aligning with subjective relief and pointing to a biochemical echo of the ancient belief that stillness cools inflammatory fire. Psychologists treating post-stress create graded exposure programs that borrow directly from anechoic design. Veterans enter a small booth whose interior walls tilt in sawtooth angles, swallowing every reflection, and the door seals with a hush that feels almost tactile. In early sessions, a therapist stays outside, reading calming narrative through bone conduction. Headphones, so words arrive inside the skull, yet make no ripple in the room. Over weeks they dial down narration intervals, lengthen pauses, deepen until the participant can rest elbow on knee, eyes closed while the booth offers nothing but heartbeat, murmur, and a faint memory of footfalls left behind in a hallway of fluorescent tiles. Sleep logs at home begin to show fewer night terrors, and wearable actigraphs display longer consolidated slow-wave intervals, mirroring results from desert hermits who learned centuries earlier that fear softens when the mind recognizes quiet as ally rather than ambush. Audiologists, meanwhile, tackle tinnitus by reversing the logic of deprivation, because their patients suffer not from lack of sound but from an uninvited ring that crowds every idle moment. They guide sufferers into semi-silent chambers, then weave in barely perceptible broadband noise at the spectral notch, matching individual tinnitus frequency. Over 20-minute blocks, the auditory cortex learns to map external input onto internal phantom, and gradually the ringing recedes into the added hush. Follow-up scans reveal rebalanced activity between primary auditory fields and limbic emotion centers, suggesting that when silence is delivered with surgical precision, it can redraw even entrenched neural loops. Corporate wellness programs experiment too. In high-rise offices above honking avenues, firms install micropods, no larger than wardrobe closets, each padded with recycled cellulose fibers. Employees step inside for 7-minute resets, guided by dim blue ceiling lids that fade toward indigo, while a floor transducer hums. The subbase of ocean swell, just below audible threshold. Heart rate sensors clipped to earlobes feed data to an AI that nudges brightness and vibration in real time, aiming for a particular ratio of heart interval variation linked to parasympathetic rebound. Internal surveys show presenteeism scores falling and afternoon caffeine runs shrinking, because minds return from the pod with the same refreshed clarity. Once only monks and floaters described. Architects echo these findings in residential towers where bedrooms are now marketed with sound pressure ratings not unlike thermal insulation values. Triple-pane windows, gasketed door frames, and staggered stud walls drop nighttime ambient noise. 15 decibels below city code, turning 10th-floor apartments into quiet cells, stacked toward the clouds. Residents track sleep on smart rings and notice deeper stages, expanding by 20%, even though light pollution and digital alerts persist, hinting that the ear may dominate. Circadian anchoring more than retinas do when the day's stimulus load is high. All these interventions converge on one delicate equation. Provide exactly enough external cue to ground the nervous system while stripping away the chronic drone that hyperstimulates stress circuits. The balance varies. Some bodies crave heartbeat recordings, some prefer low pink noise, some need nothing more than air moving softly against skin. Yet across studies, a common signal emerges in bloodstream chemistry. Night after exposure to therapeutic hush, levels of gamma-aminobutyric acid rise, while adrenaline metabolites dip and melatonin peaks sharpen. Biochemical proof that silence writes its own prescription in the language of molecules. As researchers refine these protocols, they look back to desert caves and ahead to Martian habitats, recognizing that whether one faces sandstone silence or vacuum hush, the brain requires a scaffold of predictable sensation to feel safe, and once trust forms, quiet becomes a bridge, not an abyss. Engineers designing future spacecraft cabins now simulate not only oxygen flow, but subtle vibration patterns, so that astronauts' inner ears detect a heartbeat's low pulse through wall panels, replicating the comfort of distant surf. Hospital planners borrow the same idea, embedding low-frequency transducers in ICU. Mattresses tuned to 70 beats per minute, thus replacing shrill alarms. With a rhythmic nudge that never fully wakes the patient, yet keeps nurses alerted through wearable haptics. Clinical trials continue charting precise decibel curves for optimal healing, but the essence remains ancient. Let the body drop its armor of startle reflex, let breathing lengthen until lungs whisper, let the mind sift memory and dream in safety. And when dawn arrives, reintroduce sound, gently like bells across a cloister field. Guided by stonemason intuition, float tank inventiveness, orbital telemetry, and gene ASA alike, modern therapy turns silence from absence into medicine, a living salve poured lightly over frayed nerves, teaching them how to rest without pause. Our path now flows toward the neural cartography behind these outcomes, examining how networks of salience and default mode weave together under hush, mapping pathways that resemble night constellations, and hinting that in the quiet brain and cosmos reflect one another with startling symmetry. Without pause, our path now flows toward the neural cartography behind these outcomes, examining how networks of salience and default mode weave together under hush, mapping pathways that resemble night constellations, and hinting that in the quiet brain and cosmos reflect one another with startling symmetry. And this widening of internal bandwidth becomes even more evident when we examine how quiet alters not just immediate physiology, but the cascading chain of nightly processes that follow. Because once the thalamic relay cells slip into burst mode, they set off a choreography of cortical slow waves that sweep front to back, like vast ocean rollers carrying calcium surges that trigger gene expression for synaptic down selection and metabolic housekeeping. And researchers tracking these waves in magnetoencephalograph observe that in evenings preceded by 30 unbroken minutes of sub-30 decibel hush, the slow wave front travels a full 15% farther across the cerebral mantle, meaning more neurons score a chance to offload waste proteins and recalibrate firing thresholds. Before dawn's first light, this deeper travel translates into tangible, next-day sharpness. Pilots, tested in flight simulators, show reaction times shaved by 1/5 of a second. Coders solve logic puzzles with fewer errors. Language students retain subtle phoneme contrasts that usually blur after fatigue. An MRI spectroscopy reveals higher brain glutathione levels, key antioxidant, hinting that quieter evenings may directly fortify neuronal resilience against oxidative stress. Engineers designing adaptive hush pods Now prototype ceiling membranes, embedded with phase-canceling microdrivers, that listen to HVAC rumble, then output, reverse phase, into gypsum panels so the bedroom itself becomes an active muffler. Simultaneously, a floor plate senses heel strikes in an adjacent apartment and generates upward counterpulses, dampening footfall energy before it reaches mattress springs, creating an immersive silence, transparent to the occupant, yet dynamically tuned moment by moment. Inside such rooms, personal routine becomes almost monastic. 15 minutes before the planned descent into sleep, smart bulbs shift from soft amber to a dim crimson that drops melanopic lux to single digits. A floor transducer lowers its tempo from 70 beats per minute to 50, matching the target heart rate for parasympathetic dominance. And a wall niche releases a microdose of hinoki wood aroma terpene blend, shown to elevate heart rate variability by 3%, while microphones verify that ambient noise remains beneath the 35 decibel comfort curve before granting permission for the occupant's wind-down. Ritual to proceed. That ritual might begin with 3 rounds of slow diaphragmatic breaths counted on fingers resting over a gently pulsing haptic pad, followed by a languid series of forward folds and spinal rolls, performed on the mattress, movement so gradual it adds no appreciable decibel spike yet provides proprioceptive closure signals to the cerebellum, reminding it that the body's day work is complete and grounding is safe. Before settling into stillness and letting the engineered quiet carry consciousness toward the first alpha bridge, where thoughts elongate like shadows at sunset. Home trials using this full protocol demonstrate that even in dense urban environments, participants push deep sleep percentage from 16 to just over 24 within a week and continue climbing toward 28 by the end of a month, while wrist temperature sensors confirm a smoother core body cooling curve, arguably because suppressed noise prevents microarousals that would otherwise spike thermogenesis. Importantly, the protocol never enforces absolute void. Instead, it leaves a thread of predictable low frequency vibration, the hum of phase-shifted counterpulses, or the faint sigh of an air purifier, to serve as a gentle orientation beacon, so that limbic circuits retain a sense of place, echoing the ancient desert monks who kept a single oil lamp flickering against limestone so the mind knew dawn would come and no predator lurked behind the silence. Researchers expand this principle into neonatal incubators by embedding bass shakers directly under mattress pads, tuned to the averaged maternal heartbeat spectrum between 55 and 65 Hz. Premature infants exposed to this synthetic, yet constant baseline display, faster maturation of vagal tone, and leave intensive care nearly a week sooner on average, reinforcing the hypothesis that silence soothes best. When laced with a simple steady cue, the developing brain can trust. On the opposite edge of life, span memory care facilities now test hushed corridors lined with acoustic felt and tracked lighting that dims in response to vocal amplitude. So residents with dementia experience a hallway that grows softer and darker as speaking volume rises, encouraging automatic self-quieting and producing measurable drops in evening wandering behavior. Staff report residents falling asleep in half the usual time, with fewer call bell alerts overnight, suggesting that structured hush can compensate for fractured internal timekeeping. Sports franchises push forward too, adopting floating tank complexes where players rotate through 70-minute silence, cycles ending with 5 minutes of graded reintroduction to locker room ambience. And lactate analytics reveal that a single float session combined with mild compression garments accelerates clearance by 16% over passive rest alone, perhaps because deep hush lowers catecholamine output, allowing hepatic and renal pathways to accelerate metabolic sweep. Even in virtual realms, game designers implement quiet nodes, procedurally generated gardens where ambient layers thin to near silence at specific narrative junctures. PRIMING. Players' neural networks for heightened story absorption. EEG headbands worn by beta testers show alpha-theta coupling spikes when entering these nodes, matching signatures of floatpod users and indicating that the brain's engagement curve can be tuned by subtracting sound rather than adding stimuli. All these vignettes converge on a central lesson. Silence is not a blank canvas, but a living medium that, when dosed and blended with a single trustworthy rhythm, coaches the nervous system toward a state of optimized housekeeping and resilient plasticity, turning nightly rest into a strategic upgrade rather than a mere absence of wakefulness. As our exploration nears its closing chapters, we will marry every thread gravity-lined posture, breath pacing, structured light, and now calibrated hashint, a unified bedtime choreography that anyone can deploy within the span of a single evening, allowing the ordinary bedroom to echo the quiet power of orbiting stations, ancient cells, and magnesium float pods alike. So the line between scientific protocol and nightly comfort dissolves as softly as each sound we have learned to let go. During the following 7 nights, a volunteer named Layla decided to translate every strand of research into her own small apartment and to track in meticulous detail what would happen when each evening followed the choreography of gravity-lined posture, dimmed light-paced breath, and a carefully tapered hush that fell like velvet over every object in the room. So her diary would become a living map of silence in motion. On night 1, she began gently by silencing obvious culprits. She wrapped the refrigerator compressor in a magnetically clasped neoprene sleeve and set the thermostat to glide instead of step. She slid felt pads beneath chair legs and let the last city noises fade behind double-pane glass. Then she lay back on a 6-inch wedge with her calves resting on a soft roller while her smartwatch logged heartbeat intervals like pearls on a string. The hush was imperfect at 40 decibels, but her pulse still eased from 70 to 60. In 10 breath cycles, and she noted in her journal that dreams arrived with more color than usual. Morning metrics confirmed a 15% rise in deep sleep minutes and a blood pressure dip of 4 mm systolic. Night 2 added the float tank element, without water. She deployed an airbed frame with 30 microvents that exhaled warm mist across her skin so boundary lines blurred. She wore light-cancel goggles and inserted silicone ear pedals coated in beeswax. External sound floor dropped to 32 decibels, and internal awareness escalated. She heard a subtle crack in her left knee as synovial bubbles shifted. She felt the pulse behind her eardrums. Alpha waves dominated portable EEG strips and transitioned to steady theta after 17 minutes. Vivid flashes of violet drifted behind her closed lids. She awoke recalling a complete piano melody and recorded it on her phone. Heart rate variability rose another 9% relative to baseline. Night 3 introduced the orbital silence simulation. Window shades closed against city sky glow, and a low-frequency panel in the mattress produced a barely detectable rhythmic hum, matching the Schumann resonance at 7.83 Hz, giving her vestibular system a faint anchor, while the rest of the room remained silent enough for dropping coins to sound like bells. Fluids migrated as she reclined with head elevated, and by morning her previously puffy ankles showed none of their usual swelling. Glucose sensor traces revealed a smoother overnight curve, and she reported a dream of floating among auroras very similar to astronaut diary excerpts. Deep sleep share climbed to 22%. Night 4 pivoted toward monastic practice. She halted speech at sunset and lit a single beeswax taper in the corner to serve as both timer and orientation cue. Each breath lengthened to 8 seconds, inspired by the candle's slow flicker. As wax pooled and the room cooled, she felt thoughts slow in tandem. There were no auditory hallucinations, only a growing sense of spatial expansion, as though her apartment walls bowed outward. Bedside actigraphy showed she shifted position only twice, all night, rather than the usual 8. Cortisol, on waking, measured 18% lower than her Monday baseline. Night 5 combined hospital hush engineering with medieval pacing. A phone app dimmed lighting through 4 stages, while broadband pink noise faded by 2 decibels every 4 minutes, until settling at 25 decibels, just before her scheduled descent. This stage taper prevented abrupt void, and her limbic markers remained calm. EEG captured a perfect spindleburst sequence at minute 40, indicating memory consolidation. She felt an emotional release, and wrote that a worry loop about work had untangled itself in a single lucid vignette. Inflammatory. CRP prick test next morning showed a modest decline, subtle, yet consistent with ICU data. Night 6 emphasized immune recovery. She wore a chilled neck wrap to promote core cooling, opened a slight window gap to admit a 12 decibel night breeze, and layered the room with hinoki terpene vapor. The interplay of faint air movement and woody scent echoed ancient cedar cloisters. Her respiration aligned automatically to the rustle of leafless branches beyond the sill. And though airborne noise technically rose by 5 decibels, the predictability of that soft swish acted like a grounding beacon. Glymphatic clearance, proxy measured by morning saliva beta-amyloid fragments, showed a 4-point drop versus previous weeks, and her resting heart rate reached a record low of 57 beats per minute. Night 7 served as the integrative crescendo. Lights dimmed through amber into deep red, while the mattress inclined by 3 degrees. Ear pedals blocked external sound to 28 decibels, and the low mattress hum provided a baseline heartbeat. She practiced a slow rolling breath pattern, inhaling for 6 counts, holding for 1, exhaling for 8. 30 repetitions. Theta waves surged earlier than any previous night, and a long slow wave plateau occupied 31% of total sleep, far surpassing her initial 16%. Baseline. On waking, she felt an almost weightless buoyancy, and her cognitive test reaction times improved by 20%. She noted 0 craving for caffeine, and her mood tracker registered peak positivity. Across the 7-night arc, Layla's composite metrics told a coherent story. Average deep sleep proportion rose from 16 to 28%. Heart rate variability gained 34%. Evening cortisol fell by 31. Beta-amyloid output slipped downward, and subjective dream vividness doubled. Each gain followed an incremental subtraction of noise, layered with a single stable cue, so her nervous system never tipped into alert, demonstrating that a carefully graded hush, coupled with gravity alignment and breath pacing, can reproduce laboratory outcomes inside a standard urban dwelling. Her diary also captured nuances. On the 2nd night, she noticed a transient hypoitched phantom tone for about 5 minutes, yet it faded once her brain accepted the new baseline. On the 4th night, she sensed her heartbeat in her teeth for 20 seconds, again receding as comfort grew. By night 7, she reported no unusual body sounds, only a gentle resonance she described as the ocean existing inside my chest, suggesting neuronal gain controls had recalibrated. Layla's dataset now feeds back into a growing repository where clinicians, architects, and acoustic engineers correlate personal hush gradients with biometrics, refining algorithms that will soon guide bedroom devices to dial silence in personalized phases, just as smart thermostats modulate temperature, pointing toward a future where stillness becomes as curated as light and scent. And as her 7-night practice concluded without a single abrupt boundary, the knit of posture, darkness, scent and silence formed an unbroken ribbon leading consciousness from evening alertness into morning renewal, so smoothly that she never perceived the moment of crossing, just as our exploration has flowed from gravity's cradle through water, vacuum, stone corridors, clinical wards and neural constellations without a seam, carrying us gently toward the final chapter, where we gather every technique into one seamless bedtime liturgy that any listener can adopt tonight and feel the cosmic hush settle softly over their own heartbeat. Begin long before the first yawn of twilight by letting daylight gently dissolve rather than vanish in an instant. Open a single window for a moment to taste the evening air, then close it softly so the last outdoor murmur settles like dust. Lower every device volume notch by notch, while your own breathing slows to match that downward slope, because a gradual hush tells the vigilant circuits in your midbrain there is no ambush hidden in the silence, only safety unfolding in layers. Slide felt pads beneath chair feet, and aligned books on the desk, so that even a casual reach later will not scrape wood on wood. Roll a textured cloth across your bedside table to soften the resting clink of a glass, and draw curtains, half closed, so a band of amber dusk lingers as a familiar horizon for your circadian compass. Tilt the head of your mattress by the width of a weathered paperback and nestle a light bolster beneath your calves, feeling the subtle shift of blood toward the core and the spine lengthen beneath its own weight, relieved of downward pull. Let gravity become a silent collaborator, coaxing diaphragmatic arcs deeper, without any conscious force, so each inhalation travels farther into the alveolar foothills, and each exhalation leaves a little more carbon dioxide behind, instructing chemoreceptors that nothing urgent threatens, and they may loosen their grip on vigilance. Place 2 fingertips on your sternum to sense the resonance there. Then breathe in for a slow, silent count of 6. Let the breath hover for a single pulse at its peak, and glide outward through gently parted lips for a count of 8. Extending the flow, as if pouring honey in moonlight, repeat this sequence until shoulders descend of their own accord, and the tissue behind your eyes feels cool like riverstone at dusk. Choose one anchor sound, no brighter than a distant tide, and let it hum. Below waking consciousness at the threshold where the ear registers presence, yet the mind never startles. It could be a low fan set to a whisper, or a subtle sub-bass track tuned to the Schumann resonance, holding at 7.83 Hz. A sound that carries no storyline, and fades exactly where higher frequencies live. So every creak or sudden clang finds no foothold. Imagine this hum, wrapping the room in a soft electromagnetic shawl, binding floor walls and ceiling together. So orientation remains steady, while sharper edges of day fade into velvet gradient. Close your eyes and picture whichever horizon feels safest, perhaps the pale bronze band above a desert plain, or the curved windows of a star station looking down on swirling auroras. Allow the image to float without narration until color bleeds into abstract glow, behind closed lids, and even that glow drifts outward, leaving only formless dark that still feels warm like the inside of folded wings. When thoughts tap at the threshold, greet each once as you would a polite guest offer acknowledgement without invitation, then watch them wander into the corridor you have prepared, spacious and dim. Notice how each exhale lengthens by a breath hair more, and each inhale arrives cooler. Blood pressure slides lower on its own graph line, and the mattress hum meets the pulse in your wrists, forming a duet that guides the thalamus to shift. Relay mode, easing the cortex into wide, slow rhythms. Alpha waves spread like evening mist, and soon, theta rises from beneath, carrying fragments of memory like lanterns floating down a quiet river. Synapses prune redundant chatter, glymphatic channels widen to sweep metabolic debris, and at some unmarked moment, consciousness drifts across the boundary into deep water, without ever sensing the shoreline slip away. Leave a narrow crack in the curtains, so dawn can paint a first thin stripe of silver. Let the hum taper upward half a decibel every minute, as photoreceptors stir, and baroreceptors register the gentle pull of morning. Allow the body to roll once before lifting eyelids, so joints remember gravity in increments. Pick up the glass, resting on its muffled cloth, and note how the sound lands soft against the quiet. You have curated, then carry that softness into breakfast conversation, or the hush of solitary journaling. Overnights, the need to think through each step will fade, muscles will preemptively melt into the wedge light, will dim itself in your mind before the bulb's filament has time to cool, and the respiratory pause between inhale and exhale will extend on its own because the nervous system now recognizes the choreography as instinct rather than instruction. May this stitched tapestry of descending sound gradient, gravitational alignment, measured darkness, and unhurried breath guide you toward nights where dreams arrive in high resolution and mornings unfold without craving stimulants. May the gentle hush you weave become a humming hearth for synapses to restock, and for memories to file themselves neatly along dendritic shelves. And when distant worries attempt to raise their volume, may they find no echo chamber in your room, only the steady quiet you have claimed. If this journey soothed your spirit, or sparked a curiosity to wander further beneath the cosmic quilt of sleep, then press subscribe. Ring the bell, so that each new dusk, we can meet again, in wordless understanding. And until that hour, may gravity hold your bones, lightly silence, cradle your thoughts kindly, and darkness settle over you with the softness of falling ash upon twilight water.